podcast with your host, Janine Jakob. Today, I'm not in China, but all the way on the other side in the US. And I had the pleasure to meet this amazing man, Damon Davis. 4 days ago, actually, we ran into each other at this huge conference of our coach, JT Fox in California. And it was like love at first sight, except for like its friendship.
The two fast friends, no doubt about it.
So I met Damon and I always thought like, wow, you're so positive.
Mm-hmm.
You smile, you have this aura. It's infectious in a positive way. And you are a networker. You're so good with people and you're so loving and helpful and wow. And I really look forward to our tour, you taking me to Washington, DC.
Absolutely. Please come to Washington, DC.
So welcome to our podcast. Thanks for making time. It's like 6 a.m.
That's right.
You got up what time today?
I was up at 4:30. I knew that you were getting up at 3:30, so I decided that I was getting up too. I wanted to be productive. So
were you productive?
Absolutely. I got a lot done. Yeah, it was really great. And this is one of the things that I love is to be up early in the morning, productive, working on things, whether it's myself or a project or something else. So
awesome. So Damon, tell me a little bit about what is your story and who are you?
Wow.
So that the listeners know it too.
So my name is Damon Davis. I am from the Washington, D.C. area in the United States. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland. I am an adopted person. So I was born out of one family and raised in another family. Mm-hmm. I had a wonderful adoption and it offered me a lot of opportunities. And my opportunities have included things like going to college and graduate school, but also things like working for the Obama administration in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. I was able to eventually find my birth parents. I found my biological mother and my biological father separately. Two amazing stories of reunion. And it's been really empowering. But also among the things that I've been working on are some self-development things. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the lessons that I learned in life were from my parents. My father built a wonderful comfort company. He made millions and millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he died broke. And so this is part of the reason I'm here at this conference that you and I are at, is to learn more about wealth building, leadership, collaboration, and trying to find partners for things that I'm working on. So I got a lot of stories. We could go on and on.
So when I met you and you told me actually that you were adopted and we spoke about like stories of people, I was like, oh, wow. And actually, to be honest, I felt a little bit like pity. Mm-hmm. Because I have not met many people yet who are adopted or that I actually know they are adopted. Mm-hmm. In China, I know one American, we spoke about this. He opened up to me, but it was not only a good story. There was a lot of sadness, so many like feelings and uncertainties. Mm-hmm. So I always feel like, oh, when you're adopted, it's probably something bad. Mm-hmm. So I was surprised when you just said, oh, it was like a wonderful adoption. Mm-hmm. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about it? And especially also how was meeting your real parents and mm-hmm. growing up with the other parents?
Yeah.
We can't imagine that.
And I'm really glad you asked this because there are a lot of misconceptions about adoption. People often think that it is a rescue, that a child has been brought from a terrible situation into an awesome situation.
Right.
And it's not always correct. There are some places where a person is brought from a bad situation into a better one, but there's also places where a birth mother may have been coerced out of having her child and keeping it, and that adoption was kind of forced by her dad, by her, rabbi or church leader, or by society who said, you're going to be too young to be a mother. You can't be a good mother to this baby. Mm. So I always encourage people to remember that adoption starts from a challenging place.
Okay.
And it's also important to recognize that it's a challenging place for the adoptive parents also. There's a reason that they haven't had children on their own. Mm. They may have lost a child. They may not be able to conceive, or for whatever reason. So it's important to remember that adoption starts from a challenging place for everybody involved.
Okay.
And then thirdly, the adopted person actually doesn't have a choice. They are a child. They are an infant. They may be a child who's in foster care. And unfortunately, that means that they don't get a say as to where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite sure if any crying baby were to be asked, would you rather stay here with your mom? They would probably say yes.
Mhm.
So it's important for us to all think about what adoption actually means, the transplantation of a child from their family of origin into another family. Now that I've said all that, I think it's also important to remember that they're not all bad either. Like
Yeah.
adoptions can be absolutely amazing. Mine was fantastic. So my birth parents, my adoptive parents are both Black. My mom is light skinned, my father was dark skinned, and I'm in the middle. So for all intents and purposes, we looked like family. I knew growing up that I was adopted, and that was super helpful for me because I grew up with the knowledge of my origin story to a degree.
Mhm.
There's something called a late discovery adoptee, which means that they don't necessarily know that they're adopted and they discover it later in life. And I'm sure you can imagine that can be very jarring for a person. So if you think about if you grow up as a teenager and you don't really realize that you're adopted, but you might feel like you're different from your parents or from your brothers and sisters, or your parents might pass away and then you're going through their stuff and you're trying to sort out their
Oh
affairs
gosh, that must
and
be
you
hard.
find something like an old birth certificate that has your birth date on it, but it has some other child's name. And you realize, oh my gosh, that might be me. I might be adopted.
Mm.
I didn't have any of those, thankfully.
So what was the age when you first got adopted? And secondly, when you actually found out, and how did you find out that you were adopted?
I was adopted at 3 months old. So right after I was born, I was adopted and taken home. I spent a short period of time in foster care.
Mhm.
And I found out I was adopted because my parents always told me from a young age, they instilled in me that it was okay to be adopted. And that made it fine for me to openly talk about it. But a lot of families don't feel that way. They say, don't tell anyone you're adopted. And they try to keep it hush and try to keep it secretive. And that can be very taxing on a person because you've just told me something incredibly important about myself
Mhm.
that I don't get to ask about, that you don't want me to go out in society and say anything about.
Do you remember the day when they actually told you that you are adopted and how they've done it?
No, I was so young. And I think that that was probably guidance that they got from social workers is tell them early, make it comfortable, and it will be fine. But not everybody got that great advice. And some folks came at it from a very, this is a secret. I don't want to talk about this. And that may have been from their own perspective. Like if a birth father or mother was not able to conceive, it's entirely possible that they didn't want to face this because it meant discussing why they had to adopt. And that could have been painful and they may not want to bring it up.
Yeah, in some cultures it may be perceived as losing face if the man or a woman like is not able to do it, basically.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So now tell me, I remember when we met from the start, I mean, you were so comfortable. You had told me not only that you were adopted, but literally that you actually met your biological parents.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about this?
Absolutely.
I'm like, I probably need some popcorn because I think like, oh my gosh, it must be like so interesting.
Yeah, I wish we did have snacks because I could talk about it forever. But I'm glad we're not going to talk about it forever because we would both be in tears. It's unbelievable. So fast forward through childhood and through college, and I'm now married. And my wife and I have decided that we are going to adopt her niece and nephew on her side of the family. These two children have lost both of their parents.
Oh, wow.
And unfortunately, the people who were caring for them were getting very old. This was their great grandmother. And we decided that it was better to, one, adopt the girl because she was older and she was approaching puberty and, you know, all of the things that go with an adolescent woman, and keep the siblings set together. So we brought her brother into our home at the same time. So I'm an adoptee and an adoptive parent.
Interesting.
We also wanted to have a child ourselves. And so we started trying to conceive. And finally, my son Seth was born. And when Seth was born, I happened to be home with him. And I'm sitting in a chair much like this with an ottoman in front of me. And my son is on the ottoman. And I'm looking down at this little baby. And I'm trying to figure out who this guy is. What's he going to grow up to be? How are we alike? And I realized that he is the first branch on my biological tree that I have ever known. And we made him. And it was a really eye-opening moment for me to understand that the same way he is a branch on my biological tree, I'm also a branch on someone else's biological tree, and I don't know who those people are.
And how did it make you feel when you saw your son and you had that realization?
It was a moment. I mean, I cried because I was very aware of the fact that I was disconnected with some people that I'm biologically related to, the same way that I'm biologically related to him. The way his DNA is from a combination of myself and my wife. Mine is a combination of two people that I have no idea in the world where they are. I don't know what they look like. I don't know where they live. I don't know what they like and dislike. I don't know if they've been thinking about me for, at the time, 36 years. And it was just a real eye-opening experience. I had some other things happen. One of my adoptive mother started to suffer mental illness. And a dear friend, Kelly, told me, maybe it's time for you to search for your biological mother. And we went to visit some in-laws, and while visiting my in-laws, this woman who's elderly pulls out all of these artifacts from the family history, and she spreads them out on the table, and she starts to tell this family history. And I realized there's a woman in my family that I don't know who is elderly like this woman is, who could lay out their family story for me, and I don't know who she is. So all of those things were inspirational for me to try to decide to search for my birth mother. I reached out to Baltimore City Social Services. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
And so I reached out to social services. I let them know that I was interested in reunion. They had me fill out some forms. They pulled back my adoption record from the archives and told me a little bit about my story. And I decided that I wanted to search for my birth mother. I'm going to cut the story short a little bit, but basically what happened was I wrote a letter introducing myself to my birth mother. I described, that I was fine, that I was thankful for everything that had happened, and that if she wanted to know me, I wanted to know her.
It's very compassionate of you.
Yeah, well, it's something that I was thinking about because I was wondering, what is it like to give birth to a child and then never know where that child went?
It's so nice that you actually put yourself in your mom's shoes, and I can see the compassion, because it was not only about you, or especially also the negative emotions that you may eventually have inside you, but you were also very compassionate about what has she been going through. Shows a lot of growth.
Yeah, that empathy is something that I'll come back to later. So I wrote this letter to my birth mother, gave it to the social worker. They found my birth mother within 2 weeks.
That was fast.
She was living right around the corner from me in Columbia, Maryland. And it turned out that we had attended the same university, that she had lived in the neighboring town most of my life as a child. And when I grew up and started working in downtown DC, when I found her, she was working right around the corner from me, 2 blocks away, and we were sharing the same DC Metro stop.
Oh my
It was
God.
absolutely crazy.
So you probably run into each other, you just don't know.
I know, we could have walked right past each other. It's like a movie. You think to yourself, like when you see the movie and the person walks this direction and the other person walks behind them, and that literally could have been us. I have no idea. It was really crazy. So
how did she react to the letter?
She told me after we spoke on the phone that when she got the letter, she read it and she cried. And she said it took her a long time to get through the letter because she was so full of tears and emotion that it was just literally, she was dripping tears on the page, and she had to put it down so she could calm herself so she could read it again. But she was so excited because she had always wondered where I had been. And it was heartwarming for her to know that I was looking for her. It ended up that our very first conversation on the phone was one that happened the night before her next birthday. So our very first talk on the phone, her birthday was the next day. And in that conversation, I learned that she's sharing the same metro stop as me, and she works around the corner. So I decided that I'm going to surprise her at her office for our reunion.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Was that a good thing, or?
It was amazing. It's funny. I went to work and I managed to concentrate for the morning. And then I got up at lunch, went around the corner, entered her building. Security called her and said, there's a Mr. Davis here to see you. And when the security guard puts down the phone, she goes, and she hangs up. And I said, why did you gasp? And she said, because she gasped. And that's how I knew that this was the moment. Like, Ann knows I'm here. This is my birth mother, Ann. And so the security guard puts me on the elevator. She says, go over there, get on that elevator, go downstairs, blah, 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 turn right. And so I get on the elevator and I'm dressed much the way I am today. So I'm looking in the reflection of the door and I'm straightening my tie and I want to make the best impression possible. And the doors open and this woman is standing right in front of me. And she looks up at me with this, oh my gosh, look on her face. And in the letter that I had written to her, I had inserted a picture of myself and my wife and her grandson, my son. So she knew who she was looking for when I showed up. I had no idea who I was looking for, but that look on her face
You knew it.
was indicative. Also partially because that face was my face.
What?
I'm looking at, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. I dove on her, I gave her a big hug, we burst into tears and just cried. And when I pulled back, I wished her happy birthday. And we just had this amazing moment of connection. And I took her to lunch and we spent a bunch of time together. And I sat there just the same way I'm sitting here talking to you. And I was just looking at her face going, oh my gosh, we look just alike. It was unreal.
Oh my gosh.
It was really amazing. And at the end of our lunch, we parted ways. She went back to her office. I went back to mine. And I said to her, listen, we're good. You can call me anytime you like, text me, whatever. I'm happy to chat with you. We're good. And she said the same. And I think that we comforted one another in knowing that after 36 years of being apart, it was okay for us to come back together.
And how many years is that ago now?
This was 2009. I had just taken a job in the Obama administration. And it was right after I took this job that my reunion happened.
So what happened since then, 2009 until now? What is the relationship like with your mom? And we didn't say anything about your dad yet.
Yeah, no, we haven't even gotten my birth father. So my relationship with my birth mother, Ann, was fantastic. Like I said, she was right around the corner from me at the office. So I could text her in between meetings and say, hey, you want to get coffee? And she would say, sure. And in minutes, we were together again. It was absolutely unbelievable. And it was almost like dating, because the same way that I was learning who she was, I was sort of falling in love with this person because I am her son. I was thinking about what she might be doing, what I'm going to ask her, when we're going to see each other again. It was really, really cute. And we had a lot of fun. And our relationship developed very well. We're similar personalities, very sort of chill, hard to sort of get us really riled up and angry or what have you. And we got along really, really well. And what ended up happening, she retired from the government that she was also working for. She moved away, this was 6 years later. So we met in 2009. 2014, she moves away, and within 9 months, she was dead. I couldn't believe it. But I felt so fortunate. Yeah, thank you. I felt so fortunate for the fact that we were able to even have that time, because I've spoken to hundreds of adoptees about their own journey, like mine, what their adoption was like, what their attempt at reunion was like. And they've told me, I tried to find my birth family and my birth father was deceased. My birth mother doesn't want to know me. My adoptive family is not supportive of the fact that I'm trying to find these people. And so their stories are not as awesome as mine.
Yeah.
And I realized how lucky I was to have 6 years with her that many people don't even get.
That's true.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Oh, I'm getting goosebumps.
I know. I told you, if I told you this whole story with all the details, we would both be in tears.
I can imagine. Now, what about your dad, basically, and were there any potential siblings?
I didn't have any siblings. So interesting. Excuse me. I was an only child in adoption. My biological mother never had any other children. And my birth father never had any other children that I know of. He didn't know I existed. So this is an interesting story too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really fascinating. So in my first conversation with my birth mother, Anne, she said, listen, I'm an open book. You can ask me anything you want. I said, great. Who's my birth father? And she names this guy, but based on her story, she had been dating him. He was unkind to her. She got pregnant. And when she told him she was pregnant, he said he would help her, but he didn't do anything. He was not supportive. And so I realized this guy who hadn't supported my birth mother at the time that he knew I was coming probably wasn't going to be that interested in knowing me when I was alive, well, and had found her.
Although it's like a really long time ago, people become more mature. Maybe he has changed. I don't know. I probably would have had the hope.
Yeah, I definitely had an inkling of hope, but I realized again, if he didn't want to know me and her then I don't need to know him now.
Oh, so you didn't reach out to him or look for him?
Not at first, and especially because I sensed her pain from her story. She had gotten pregnant, told him she was pregnant, and what happened was she called him at work, and the operator said, oh, you'd like to speak to him? Is this his wife calling? And that was when she knew that she had been in an extramarital affair, and she was pregnant by this guy. So she was the side lady for a guy who was married, and unfortunately she had gotten pregnant.
Oh, no.
So based on all of that history, I recognized that there was no way that I needed to find him. Her pain had been too great. I wanted to be with her, and our reunion was so wonderful. I just said, there's no way I need to find this guy. But then she passed away, and I said, you know what? It takes two people to make a person. And she's gone. I can't hurt her now if I search. And I am curious, who is this guy that I came from?
Of course.
So I found this gentleman. We spoke on the phone. We had zero connection.
Wow.
Anne and I had a real rapport. Like when I talked to her, I could feel that we were similar. When I spoke to this guy on the phone, I was just like,
whatever.
There was nothing there.
Wow.
And to cut to the end, one day he sends me a letter and he basically says, listen, Mr. Davis, I'm not the guy. I'm not your birth father. And I was a little hurt by that. I was like, wow, this guy doesn't even want to know me. Like he doesn't want to see me or anything. But I tried to start getting over that. And at the same time, coincidentally, my mother-in-law is also adopted. So my wife's mother is an adopted person as well. And my sister-in-law said, hey, mom's adopted. We should learn more about her. Let's find out what her DNA is. And so we all did DNA tests on Ancestry DNA. Myself, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, my wife, and my son. And so I was interested in learning about that maternal connection from my wife to my son, and some of my own connection to Seth that I hadn't known before. And what ended up happening was I'm online looking at my family's DNA, and I saw something really interested in theirs. So I went over to my profile and started looking at mine. And I had two extremely close biological connections. And as I was sitting there looking, one was obviously going to be my son, Seth. The second one was this guy that I didn't know. And when I clicked on it, it says, this profile is your father.
So he had taken a DNA test like back in the days.
Yes. So
and that was the man you literally had connected with on the phone already, right?
No.
No?
It was a different guy.
Oh my gosh. So your
crazy?
mom basically had sex with two men.
Yeah. And here, I'm sure you could probably relate that if you were with two people in a certain time frame,
of course,
the last person that you were with is the one that you're going to think you are pregnant by when you find out you're pregnant. But you may have been pregnant by the first person. So
we had no judgment here.
Yeah. I mean,
wow. And then?
So I find this guy, I chat with him on the phone, and I sent him a letter first. I wrote him a very different letter than the one I had written Anne. Anne knew that I was out in the world.
Of course.
She had given birth to me, right? This guy didn't know I was coming because Anne thought that my birth father was someone else. So when I went and found this guy, he said, I'm not the guy. I ended up discovering this other person. I was a total surprise to him when I entered his life.
So maybe he was actually not unkind to your mom, but maybe the relationship just like ended in normal terms.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Because it's a different person. She
Yeah.
thought the guy that was my birth father was unkind to
And
her.
it hurt her
And it
whole
was
life long, right?
her whole life. She went to her grave thinking that my biological father was someone completely different.
Wow.
She never knew that it's this guy who has turned out to be really amazing. His name is Bill. And Bill is just a kind person. We've developed a very good relationship. He has actually helped me. I lost my adopted mother recently.
I'm sorry.
And thank you.
Rest in peace, all mothers.
I'm telling you. And you know, I would call him and just chat with him about my visits with her and stuff while she was ill. I called him after she passed away, and he was just supportive the whole time. It was really amazing. So I spoke with him by phone. I told him my story. He was really interested in it. And coincidentally, he lives in Las Vegas.
Oh.
And I was preparing for a family trip to Los Angeles, which is very close to Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, listen, I'm going to be in your neighborhood. And since we've now found each other, maybe we can connect. And he said, sure. So I flew to Las Vegas from Los Angeles, and we had a day trip. And, you know, I sat down at his kitchen table, and he told me so much about the family. In an interesting twist, Bill is a genealogist. Coincidentally, Anne had also been a genealogist.
Wow.
So when I met each one of my birth parents, they had already done a full family history all the way up through many of our ancestors, all the way back to the days of slavery in America.
Interesting.
So when I met Anne, it was the day before her birthday, and immediately before my birthday. My birthday was 2 weeks later. When I met her on my birthday, she shows up with a bag. Mm-hmm. And the bag has in it a book of photos of herself. Mm-hmm. And it also has in the back my entire family tree, handwritten out way back to the early history of the United States. Wow. When I sat at Bill's table in Las Vegas, he pulls out a book, and he's showing me young pictures of himself. And he ends up handing me a piece of paper that has my entire family history written on it too. And my wife said to me, Damon, you have barely known these people, and you have your entire family history. You know more about yours. Yeah.
No one of us has that.
Yeah, it's crazy. She said, you've never known these people your entire life, and you know your whole family history more than I do. It was really crazy. So he's been amazing. I found him when he was 86 years old. He's now 90, and he looks fantastic. He's still walking around, driving. I mean, he just looks incredible. I'm feeling pretty good about life.
Las Vegas style is amazing. I lived there for half a year too. It just recently, my family took me to bingo. I hope he's enjoying his life there. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for being such an open book and letting us in to share your story. And I'm so happy to see that there's not only these sad stories with drug addicts and I don't know, these kind of stories, but it's beautiful, and I'm happy for you, and I hope that you still have a lot of time with your dad. But I have a few more questions before
Please go ahead.
So first of all, I want to ask you here, what is your advice for people who got adopted?
I do a podcast. I talk to a lot of adoptees on the podcast about their journeys through adoption. One, I would certainly advise folks to feel validated in your quest to try to find out who you really are. The podcast is called Who Am I Really? And people who are adopted frequently, who are raised in another family, they don't sometimes look like their family, right? If you were my adoptive mother and we took a family photo, we don't look alike. And so I'm always going to be reminded that I'm adopted. You may be the most loving mother and amazing, but it will still be something that is clear. So I advise folks to feel validated in the fact that you may want to try to find your biological family member. It's legitimate, right? We don't share the same blood. And you may be very outgoing and gregarious, and I may be very quiet and shy. You may be super athletic, and I might be like a math nerd. You know, I might be into theater and you may be into sports. You know, there's all kinds of different ways to slice how people can be very different. And it can be underscored by the fact that you're adopted, and you may want to try to find identity for any of the reasons that I've named and more. So I always encourage folks to feel validated in the fact that they want to search. But it also takes patience and some courage, because you don't know what you're going to find. Some folks find, as I said in the beginning, a family who doesn't want to know them, right? You were born 20, 30, 40 years ago. I've dealt with that already. I have another family. I can't go back to that pain. There's folks, you know, there are biological fathers who just say, I'm not interested. Like, I wasn't interested then, I'm not interested now. There are adoptive families who are not supportive, right? That if their narrative is, we've done so much for you, aren't we enough? And it's an interesting thing. I had one of the guests.
You didn't speak about your own family, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I will tell you that my family was supportive. And my adoptive mother told me from when I was very young, if you ever want to search for your biological family, I'm happy to help. And she was instrumental in that search, actually. She provided all of the documents that I needed for my social worker to be able to try to search for me. So that was amazing. The other piece of advice that I encourage folks to have is just courage for what they're going to face. Because as I've said, you may face what's called secondary rejection. Secondary rejection is when a person finds their birth family, their family of origin, and they are rejected from being, you know, sort of reacclimated to that family, reconnected. You may find resistance in the adoptive family, as I've said. But one of my guests said something really interesting to me. He said, my adoptive parents couldn't understand why I wanted to search for my biological family. Aren't we enough? And this person said back to their adoptive family, well, tell me this. You have more than one child. After you had the first child, why did you want to have a second one? Wasn't the first child enough? Right? I can have room in my heart to love a variety of people. Just because I'm searching for something else doesn't mean that you weren't enough in the ways that we are together. And this is something that adoptive parents have to wrap their minds around. It's like any other relationship. You and I are great friends, but I have other friends, and that's okay. I may have an adoptive family, but I also might find my biological family, and that is okay too. And people need to really wrap their minds around that. And I encourage the adoptees to have courage to go on this journey, because it can be fulfilling in ways that you don't even realize. Like I said, I had a wonderful family growing up, so I wasn't really looking for anything. But when I found my birth mother and my birth father, it fulfilled something I didn't even know was empty. And that was incredible.
And I think there's one more tip that I have heard from you. Correct me if I'm wrong. So would you also recommend people, if you now adopt a child, to kind of tell your child at an early stage?
Absolutely. Yes.
Because I had the impression from you that this was the good thing about you and why you had such a good relationship.
Yeah, it's something that, but it has to be done the right way.
What's the right way?
Well, if you can imagine, if you were my daughter and I called you into the room at 7 years old and I said, listen, I just need to tell you something. Janine, you have other parents out there. I'm your dad, but you have another father. You're 7. You kind of know where you fit in the world, right? You're starting to understand that we are family. And now I've just told you that we have another family. You have another family. That can be jarring for a child. You mean it's too early then, or? I would suggest you say it early, but I also suggest that you make yourself available to talk about it. So if that child walks away and comes back and says, wait, can you tell me again what adoption means, right? Or who do you think my mom is? You have to be in a position to accept that that conversation is coming. Play it out in your mind, practice it. Because that child will come back and they'll want to talk to you about this. And it can go a couple of different ways, but the way that it should not go is, don't ever ask me about that again. I see. See, that happens sometimes. And unfortunately, that suggests that a taboo has been breached.
Mm.
And then, as with anything, it creates more curiosity. Why doesn't my dad want to talk about this? I want to know more. There's something around the corner there
There's a
that he's
story.
not telling me.
Mm.
And I think that that's incredibly important versus if you come back to me and say, Dad, tell me a little bit about what adoption means. And I'm open to talking with you about it. You and I now have trust about this topic. You feel comfortable coming to me to ask about it and feel comfortable that I'm okay talking about it. And therefore you can be okay talking about it too. So it's important for folks to think through the ways that they're going to communicate about adoption, be open and receptive, and recognize these questions are coming. Your kids are going to ask you hard questions no matter what.
Yeah.
It's going to be about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and whether you did it, and you have to be ready to answer. And adoption is yet another thing that you have to be ready to talk about.
Wow, first of all, thanks for sharing this. And I remember, I mean, I think it's impressive you yourself have actually adopted these two children. I mean, they're kind of like family already. I remember last year, like with COVID, we had a lot of conversations like between women, where a lot of women, well, nowadays there's a lot of career women, so they may get a bit older and maybe worried that they can't get children by themselves. So we were talking about like freezing eggs. I don't know what the proper real English word is for this. And also with the COVID vaccine coming, there were a lot of fears that people maybe cannot even become pregnant anymore because of like correlations or conflicts with the vaccine. So yeah, even in China, I met a lot of people, also foreigners, who would like to adopt, but like as a foreigner inside China, I mean, there's different regulations, so it's a little bit more challenging. Two last questions for you. Number one, like, I mean, you live in the US, like, how can people adopt, or is there a process or some advice that you would give, or a specific organization you recommend? How would you start to do it if you're considering to adopt?
There's a plethora of agencies out there that can help. I definitely recommend doing the research. Find out how that adoption agency operates. What is their methodology? What has their history been? Are they, a reputable organization? That's important to think through because adoption is not always seen favorably in the adoptee community. Adoptees sometimes feel like we are a commodity, that there has been a high price associated with getting a child into a family, and it feels like a marketplace. But you want to be with an adoption agency that is out to place children for the right reasons. So for example, I'm part of a charity called the Gift of Adoption Fund. And adoption in the United States is incredibly expensive. Thus, the marketplace mentality.
Can you give a rough number? Like, what is expensive?
It's multiple thousands of dollars, and I'm not in the low tens. I'm in the multiple tens of thousands of dollars. Wow. It's crazy. And the Gift of Adoption Fund offers grant funding to families who are interested in adoption with a priority towards the following kinds of children. Sibling sets who they believe should stay together, right? Can you imagine how jarring it is if you and I are brother and sister and one family adopts you and you go over there, and another family adopts me and I go over there. We don't know where one another are.
I have cats. I'm a cat mom only so far for now, but I can imagine it must be horrible.
So they prioritize keeping sibling sets together. They prioritize medically fragile children, right? Again, in the marketplace, a child who is most healthy is most desirable. But there's other kids out there that need somewhere to go. They need love, they need support, they need medical care. They need to feel like they're part of a family. And unfortunately, medically fragile children are a little bit more challenging, and people shy away from that challenge.
Of course.
The organization also prioritizes children in foster care, who especially some are about to age out. So in the United States, I think a child ages out of foster care at 18 years old. Now, I don't know about you, but at 18 years old, I wasn't ready to be out in the world by myself. That is with no parents to turn to for support. That is, possibly without a college education, therefore unable to get a better job.
Mm.
It's without any of the resources that a child who grows up in a family is able to turn to in times of need in their early adulthood.
That's true.
So the Gift of Adoption Fund helps to prioritize those kinds of things. So I encourage people to look around at the different kinds of entities that are out there supporting adoption and make sure that you feel comfortable that that agency is working through adoptions from an angle that works for you, an angle that is meant to be supportive of the child's best interest. And I also recommend that an adoptive parent really take a hard look at yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Think through why it is that you're adopting, and get right with that. If you have lost a child, if you are not fertile, don't just turn around and turn to adoption super fast. You've got stuff to deal with. You've got some therapy to go through to make sure that you're okay first, because you have suffered trauma. If you have lost a child or you're infertile, those are two major elements of something that can happen to a person in their life. And it's trauma, and you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to bring a child into your home with trauma in your experience, and it's going to be translated onto your relationship with the child, and it doesn't work.
Thank you so much. I actually really love this. Very helpful advice, I think, for many of us out there. And I love that next to your full-time job and having your own family with 3 kids and your wife, you're super active in this organization. Plus, you do your podcast. You have 190 people interviewed by now.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. You go to these conferences like 4 days on the other side of the US.
That's
where we
right.
just met. Actually, in the next few minutes, it's about to start.
Yeah, that's right. We gotta go.
I love it. So one last thing. I know you're an enthusiast when it comes to self-development in general. So no matter if somebody wants to adopt or is an adoptee, like what would be some general advice you would like to give anybody when it comes to either self-development or anything else? Like if there's like, I'm this person, I love to say, take action. There's this one thing that you can do today or tomorrow. Start implementing it. I know we want to do a lot of things. It's the same with the New Year's resolutions. There's a bunch of things. But what is this one thing or that one advice that you want us to take action or to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I have to offer more than one.
That's okay.
The first one I want to start with is empathy, right? Same way that you're sitting here listening, asking questions, learning from what I'm offering. People don't always do that. We tend to be judgmental of each other. I think I know you, so I put my sort of preconceived notions on you as a person. And I've never actually asked you about any of those preconceived notions in my mind. So I think we need to hear one another's stories, which is why I'm appreciative of what you're doing, because you're bringing people out to offer stuff like what I'm offering today, and that's incredibly powerful. But it also requires that the listeners have empathy as they listen to my story and other stories that you're bringing together. The other thing I would suggest is I love to work out, and I think your physical health translates into so many elements of the rest of your life. When I get up in the morning and I work out, I feel great because the blood is flowing, my brain is working, and I now can check the box on having been productive in some part of my day. And now I'm starting to stack productivity on top of that just by getting up and getting my son to school, getting up and going to work, coming home and doing the podcast. Like I really got myself feeling good physically. And I think that that translates a lot into mental health. And the other thing I would say is that I think people need to focus on their financial health too. One of the big lessons that I learned from my father, my adoptive father, Willie, was, he started this company, he made millions, and he died broke. And that was part of the reason for that was because he never took the time, and nobody led by example to educate him on what financial health was. So he made a bunch of money, but he also did what it looked like wealthy people did, which was buy shiny stuff. That was what was in his mind. And unfortunately, what I've now learned, because I've taken this voyage of trying to understand wealth building, is that the wealthy don't have shiny stuff that they like to flaunt. What they have are huge stacked bank accounts because they've invested with little seeds that they've planted throughout their life that grow over time into assets. And so I encourage folks to start thinking about where they can learn more about wealth building, financial health, figuring out what kinds of entrepreneurial endeavors they may want to do. What kinds of things do you do that may be something that someone would pay for you to consult them on? You probably have a business in your life that you don't realize. And so I encourage folks to think about their financial health, because I would hate to see someone go through the pain of what my dad did, having earned millions of dollars.
And working hard all life.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we have empathy. We're going to start working on our empathy. Number 2, we're going to work out more, because physical health is related to mental health. And last but not least, we got to educate ourselves on the financial health as well.
That's right.
And the wealth. So this now brings us to, it's 7 o'clock now. We can go to Mega Success by JT Fox. Thank you so much for being an early bird, waking up at 4:30 a.m. to be here with us, and I'm so grateful we met.
Yes.
You actually wrote a really nice message in my book. I'm still not allowed to read it yet. It's somewhere like in the pages and towards the back. So I look forward to this. Thank you so much. We stay in touch, and I'm definitely going to come visit you in Washington, D.C.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. Take care. Thanks for having me.
Guys, and make sure that you definitely check out his podcast. You can see all the links down below, and have a great day.
Bye, guys.